بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Today is Monday and inshallah we'll continue halaqah from the fiqh of tahara. Today inshallah we'll start a new chapter, the chapter of wiping over socks. A very interesting topic inshallah. يقول الإمام المقدسي رحمه الله تعالى: وعن المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله عنه قال: كنت مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في سفر فأهويت لأنزع خفيه فقال: دعهما فإني أدخلتهما طاهرتين ثم مسح عليهما. In this hadith, which is narrated by Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah radiallahu anhu, he says that I was with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was traveling, and the time of wudu came, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was doing his wudu, and he was wearing socks. So when the time came to wash his feet, I wanted to help the Prophet ﷺ remove his socks so he can wash his feet. The Prophet ﷺ told him, do not take off my socks because I wore them when I was in a state of purity. And then the Prophet ﷺ wiped over his socks when he was doing wudu. Now the issue of wiping over socks, there is no disagreement in the concept of wiping over socks amongst all the scholars. All the scholars of Islam have agreed that wiping over the socks is allowed even for convenience, even if you don't need to. You're wearing socks because you wanted to wear socks, or you're going to work, or you're just enjoying the look of your socks. It is okay for you to wipe over socks, even if you can take off your socks and wash your feet. It's completely fine. It's not like tayammum, where tayammum you can only do tayammum when there is no water, or you're not able to use water. Wiping over socks is different. You can do it even if it's for your convenience, even if you're enjoying it, and this is something allowed in Islam. There's no disagreement amongst the scholars. Now we'll come to talk about the details, and that's where the scholars differ a lot on. What type of socks, how long can you wipe, how can you wipe, and so on and so forth. The first issue is, there are 4 types of socks. The first is a sock made out of skin. A sock made out of skin, either goat skin or camel skin. There is no difference of opinion amongst the scholars that is allowed for you to wipe over. And that is a sock that the Prophet ﷺ used to wear, and that is a sock that the Prophet ﷺ wiped over. It is not mentioned in, there's no authentic report that the Prophet ﷺ ever wore any other type of sock. The only type of sock that he wore, or that was available to him, was made out of skin. So any sock that is made of skin, people very rarely wear socks made of skin. In certain countries, people still wear socks made out of skin. But just for learning purposes, informative purposes, that you are allowed to wipe over socks without any difference of opinion. The second type of sock is any sock that was made out of other materials, like linen or cotton or wool. This is something the scholars have differed upon. Are you allowed to wear them or not? Now, even this type of sock is of 2 types. It's something that is very thick or something that is slightly thin. Something very thick, the criteria differentiating between a thick sock and a thin sock is, can water seep through? Can water go through that material or not? If it can't go, then it's considered to be a thick sock. If it can go, it's considered to be a thin sock. So a thick sock, which is not made out of skin, majority of the scholars allow wiping over it, because many of the Sahaba, they used to have socks made out of linen, and they used to have socks made out of wool, and they would wipe over them. It's not mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ, but it is narrated by many Sahaba that would do that. So that is something that majority of the scholars allow it. Some scholars say no, because the Prophet ﷺ didn't do that, so it's better for us to stay away from that. The third type of sock is a sock that is slightly thinner, where water can go through that material, but you cannot see your skin behind it. You cannot see the skin, meaning the skin of your foot, from above the sock, from outside of the sock. That is the third type of sock. Now this sock, this is a minor opinion. Some scholars have allowed it. Majority of the scholars don't allow this. But there's a good amount of scholars that still allow this, and they say a sock is a sock, as long as you can't see the skin. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't tell us that you can't wipe over these socks. And if you can wipe over a thick sock that is made out of wool or linen, then why not a thinner sock? And where does this condition come from that water cannot seep through it or not? All right. So this is it's a good amount of scholars, contemporary and traditional and classical scholars, who say this is still allowed. The fourth type of sock is a sock where you can see your skin behind it. It is so thin that you can see your skin behind it, and that is something that is not allowed for a person to wipe over. There's no scholar, from what I know, that allows wiping over such a sock. The reason I'm mentioning is that you're free to believe whatever you want. You're free to follow whatever you want. This is just to educate you that if you see someone else following another valid opinion, whether he is wiping over a thick wool sock or a thin wool sock where the skin cannot be seen, then you leave them alone. You understand that this is a valid opinion for them to follow. You don't need to criticize them. You don't have to follow it if you're not convinced with it, but you don't have to criticize other people with it. And if there's an imam who follows another opinion, it's completely okay to pray behind him if he's following another valid opinion. He's not doing something haram. He's not something that the scholars have agreed not to do. And it's okay for you to even pray behind him, and so on and so forth. For example, the issue of eating camel meat. Some scholars say that camel meat breaks your wudu. Some say that don't. If the imam believes that camel meat doesn't break your wudu and he leads prayer, is it okay for a person who believes that it breaks wudu to pray behind it? Yes, completely fine. These are valid differences of opinion that a person has to respect. Now, moving on. That's the first thing. Second condition to wiping over sock is that it has to cover the entirety of the foot that is supposed to be washed. What is the part of foot that needs to be washed? From your toes till your ankles. So all of that should be covered in your sock. Meaning if your sock is showing half your ankle or a little bit of your ankle, some of the socks in today's time, they show a little bit of the ankle, that cannot be wiped over. It has to cover the ankle or more. The entirety of the foot from the ankle or more. That is the second condition. The third is that the timing. How long can you wipe over a sock? You can wipe over a sock for a day and night if you are in your city. If you're residing in your hometown, wherever you are a resident of, whatever city you are a resident of, you can wipe for a day and night, 24 hours. If you are traveling, you're allowed to wipe for 3 days and 3 nights, meaning 72 hours. So this is the duration of wiping. When does the time begin? The time begins when you break your wudu after wearing your socks. After you wear your socks. Another condition I forgot to mention, we'll go a little back, that you need to have wudu before wearing your socks. When you wear your socks, you must be on wudu when you wear your socks for it to be allowed for you to wipe over that socks. Meaning if you didn't have wudu and then you wore your socks, you're not allowed to wipe over them. The Prophet ﷺ in this hadith, he told Mughira ibn Shu'bah that leave them on because I wore them on tahara. I wore them in a state of purity, and the scholars have derived from this hadith that you need to be in a state of purity when you wear your socks for it to be allowed for you to wipe over that socks. Coming to the duration, a day and night for a resident, 3 days and 3 nights for a traveler. When does the time begin? When you break your wudu. When you break your wudu, the timeline starts, and you have a day and night from there. I'll give you an example. A person does wudu at 5 a.m. in the morning. He washes his feet, he's not wearing his socks. He washes his feet. At 6 a.m., he wears his socks. He's coming to the masjid, and then he's going to go to work. At 10 a.m., he breaks his wudu. At 2 p.m., he does his wudu and he wipes over his socks. When does the timeline start? At 10 a.m. From 10 a.m., let's say on Monday, he broke his wudu at 10 a.m. He has till 10 a.m. on Tuesday to wipe over his socks. As soon as 10 a.m. comes, then his wudu is broken, and we'll talk about that in a bit. If he's traveling, then it's for 3 days. From Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday, 10 a.m., his timeline ends. His 3 days and 3 nights end. Was that clear? We'll take a few questions in the end, inshallah. If a person he wore his socks before he traveled. Let's say he wore his socks in the morning. Usually people prepare themselves whenever they're going on a trip, and he wore his socks before he traveled. How long does he wipe over? Does he wipe over for a day and night, or does he wipe over for 3 days and 3 nights? We asked the person, where did you break your wudu? Did you break your wudu before traveling? Then you only have 1 day and 1 night. If you broke your wudu after traveling, after you initiated travel and you left the city, let's say you were traveling, let's say someone's traveling from Houston to New York, and after he got to New York, he broke his wudu. So we say you have 3 days and 3 nights. But if he broke his wudu before he left Houston, even though he's doing his wudu after he gets to New York, he only has 1 day and 1 night. We asked the person, where did you break your wudu? That defines whether he has a day or a night, or he has 3 days or 3 nights. Was that clear? Okay. The fifth and last issue, or the second last issue, is what if you're doubling on? You're wearing a sock and a shoe. Can you wipe over a shoe or not? There are 2 scenarios here. If you did not wipe over that sock, meaning, or you did not break your wudu, and you wore something on top of it, like a shoe or a second sock, then you're allowed to wipe over it, even though the second piece of footwear did not cover your entire foot. Meaning, if it was a shoe that showed part of your ankle, you're still allowed to wipe over it with one condition, as long as it doesn't fall off on its own. Meaning, it sticks to your foot like a shoe. But a flip-flop, or these are some of the slides that we wear, those fall off. You need to carry them. They don't like stick to your foot. Those cannot be wiped over. But if it's something that sticks on it by itself, then you're allowed to wipe over them, even though they might not cover the entirety of your foot, as long as you're wearing a sock under and you haven't broken your wudu. If you broke your wudu, then you can wear a shoe, but you cannot wipe over it. You can, whenever the time of wudu comes, you need to take off your shoe and then wipe over your socks. Was that clear? The last is, how do you wipe over your sock? Wiping is always done once. You never wipe 3 times, in whatever scenario, whether it's tayammum, whether it's wiping over your socks, whether it's wiping over your turban, or a sister is wiping over her scarf. We'll discuss some of these issues in the next halaqah, inshallah. Or you're wiping over for an injury. Certain people have a cast and they need to wipe over. They can't wash certain parts of their body. Every time, wiping is only done once. The way you wipe is, you wet your hands, and you open up your fingers and you go over the foot. The right foot first, you wipe over the right foot first, and then the left foot first on the top of your foot. Not the bottom, not the sides, just the top once with wet hands, and that is enough for you to wipe over your socks. This is in summary, the rulings and how to wipe over your socks, and what is not allowed, and what is allowed and what is not allowed. The last issue I forgot to mention is that if you have wiped over your socks and you take off your socks, your wudu is broken. You had wudu and you decided to, let's say, you did wudu at 5 a.m., you wore your socks at 6 a.m., at 10 a.m. you broke your wudu, at 2 p.m. you did wudu and wiped over your socks, you prayed Lord, you came home at 4 p.m. and you decided to take off your socks. If you take off your socks, your wudu is broken. You need to have your socks on for a day and night. Or the time ends. Let's say a day and night ended, 10 a.m. on Tuesday. As soon as 10 a.m. ends, your wudu is automatically broken. You have to take off your socks and wash your feet. Also, if a person is in a major state of impurity, if he has a wet dream, or he is sexually intimate with his spouse, then he has to take off his socks when he takes a ghusl. Meaning you cannot wipe over your socks when it comes to ghusl. The reason I'm mentioning is this, because when you have an injury, you're allowed to wipe over that cast, but when it comes to socks, you're not allowed to wipe over your socks when you are doing a ghusl. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our hearts just the way He has purified our appearances, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with knowledge that is beneficial, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reunite us in the gardens of Jannah with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family members, his companions, just the way He gathered us in the beautiful masjid. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.